When we begin to try to think about creation, specifically the construct of reality we inhabit, it doesn't take long until you get to the point where things start to get weird, fascinating, overwhelming. It is important to realize that we are applying finite or contingent principles to the task of grasping a necessary or infinite, eternal cause. In most cases, reasonable people can agree that we are having an experience of some kind. Whether one argues that the experience is subjective, all in my head, or all in your head, or whether one agrees that we are having a shared objective experience, we can all more or less find common ground on the assumption that we are here, right now, in some way. We can interact with our environment. We can communicate with other sentient beings. But when it comes to why this is happening, or how it all began, there is where the robust debate lies. And also room for interpretation. If we move beyond the agreements and jump right to the weird stuff, we find ourselves in a conversation about the nature of reality itself.
Greetings everyone.
The study of quantum theory has advanced our ability to contemplate the nature of reality by opening the door to a new context for discussing the matter.
Did you catch that? Discussing
This
the
newly
matter.
opened door has allowed us to...
Welcome, my friends. Welcome to Armor of Truth Radio number 67. I'm giving you a little introduction here before we get started with our topic today. So just bear with me and enjoy this little short introduction into the mind of God, if you will. If you will, because we don't really mean the mind of God. That would be pantheism or panentheism. Anyway.
to materialism, then we have a lot to learn about the nature of our reality. Materialists operate on the assumption that there is nothing to be found beyond matter, at least nothing that can be qualified or quantified scientifically. Similarly, naturalists think within the confines of the natural universe. And that sounds like an enormous field of possibility, and it is. There is tremendous knowledge and application to glean from the natural sciences. But there is always that pesky phenomenon of consciousness or mind lurking over the shoulder of the materialist and the naturalist. And that is where we take up this conversation. The mind is miraculous because it cannot be accounted for within the limits of classic materialism. Perhaps consciousness or the mind is miraculous to us today in the same way lightning was miraculous to the ancients. And perhaps
Maybe so. Maybe so. How's it going, everybody? As Seth the Saxon said, hey, what could go wrong? Right? It's not that big of a topic, right? It's not no one ever talks about this. It's just one of the side issues. Yeah. Well, welcome, my friends, to this episode, number 67 of what we call around here Armor of Truth Radio, where here at the Armor of Truth ministry, a couple times a week, we do this little podcast, which I prefer to call radio, because I don't know what a pod is, but I know what a radio is. And anyway, so on these days, we view current events or controversial issues, and we try to look at them through the lens of our Christian worldview. I always get a little nervous now since I had that problem the other day with no audio. So if you guys could just let me know that we're all good with the audio, that would be fantastic. And we're going to dive right into this to this issue, which is pretty important, I think. The chat is already excited. I can see we're all excited about this issue today. What in the world? Thank you, Allison. What in the world is this guy going to say? Is he going to lose all his followers or subscribers in one stream? Or is he going to change the world with the position that no one's heard so far? Probably neither of those things are going to happen. Anyway, we're going to attack this issue biblically, and that's it. We're going to come at it from a biblical perspective. Now, that's not true. That's not exactly true. We are going to appeal to what we can know about the world we live in. But the reason I started off with this little introduction about this video from my channel called The Mind of God, and just thinking a little bit about whatever quantum physics is. It's been said no one really understands quantum physics, and I tend to think that's probably the case. But anyway, and whatever you might think of it, I happen to think that the more science progresses, the more God becomes apparent. So materialism must surely die eventually. It will have to. And that is one thing. If quantum physics is real, or if the assertions are real, if some of the implications are actual, then it just leads right to a creator. And that's what this little 10-minute video I did, I don't know, a year ago, something like that. February 16th of this year. That's right. February. This was not that long ago. So this was back before the world sort of came to a screeching halt, when different things were on our minds. Anyway, here we are, about 9 months or whatever, 8 months, 7-8 months down the road from all that, and now we're getting back into talking about some of the issues that were on our minds before, and that's actually a very welcome thing. And so today we will tackle this issue of flat Earth. I'm gonna approach it in the way I've chosen to approach it. Some people would choose to go at it a different way. I haven't set out to prove that the Earth is flat. I haven't set out to prove that the Earth is any shape. It doesn't matter that much to me. It just doesn't. It really doesn't. But I want to look at it biblically, and I want to look at it with some perspective that we can count on. All right, and then we will come away from this with. Now, listen. Of course, whatever your view on the matter is, you're absolutely welcome to it. I don't think anyone's gonna fault you for asking questions. I'm gonna have to get rid of that. I'm gonna have to get rid of that light there on my face, folks. If you'll bear with me for a minute, I'll go ahead and play a little more of this intro video I had ready for you, and then we will jump right into this presentation.
Perhaps it will be the study of quantum theory that reveals the provenance of metaphysical phenomena. Natural theology is the study of God based on the observation of nature, as distinct from supernatural or revealed theology, which is based on special revelation. Because observing nature is an intellectual pursuit, natural theology involves human philosophy and reasoning as means of knowing God. 13th century theologian Thomas Aquinas was the first on record to apply Aristotelian logic to the Christian faith. His aim was to show that man could reason his way to sufficient knowledge of God, but that God's revelation was still certainly superior to man's ability to reason. Reason can lead one to faith, but reason may not replace faith. A period of growth in rational philosophy, even among theologians, led to the de-emphasizing of the miraculous.
Remember?
Natural theology,
The de-emphasizing
this
of
philosophy,
the de-emphasizing of the miraculous. Remember, that's what we talked about last week when we talked about this neo-orthodoxy. This attitude that reason is actually the God, that intellect is actually the deity, and therefore we must get rid of all these miracles. We must get rid of, in fact, the deity of Jesus Christ even. That's what some of these, we covered last week, neo-orthodoxy and some other of these modern interpretations, shall we say, of Scripture. Well, let's dive into this. Anybody who might want to help us out here with this ministry, it's just on the ground, boots on the ground here in Western North Carolina. Also, of course, on YouTube, trying to make it and be self-sustaining. If you would like to help us out, you know how to do that. There are links in the description to help you with that. There's a PayPal link, makes it very easy. Link on the bottom left-hand corner of your screen there makes it even easier. That'll get you like a live chat, a super chat, and also the YouTube super chats are available for anyone who wants to use those. If it's easier for you to do that, then that is fantastic. And we have a Patreon, just one $5 level right now. As it grows, we'll figure out how to utilize that platform, because we're going to have to. That is one place where it is moderately safe to put up some material that YouTube just won't let happen. They won't let it be there. Some of the stuff, recently, if you follow this channel, recently I've had at least one, maybe even a couple videos just deleted off the platform just for reading what scientists have said. If it doesn't agree with the establishment's scientists or whoever happens to be screaming the loudest at that moment, well, then you're not allowed to say it. That's what we've learned. It's not really about science, is it? When we're talking about the technocratic world and YouTube and Facebook and Twitter, it's not about science. It's about the science that the scientists or the scientist that is saying whatever supports my ideology at the moment, right? That's not truth at all. That is pragmatic, sensual truth. Whatever suits me in the moment. It's not eternal truth. So anyway, that is a decent way to underline what we're talking about today. Is it flat? Is it? Well, let's find out. We're not going to find out, but we're going to take a look at this. And we're going to be honest and straightforward about it. Let me see here. Let me get this. Let's see. Hang on a moment here. Oh, here we go. There we go. There is a little. I might have to go full screen on this. There it is. I'll refer back to this screen from time to time, but we're going to get into this. I'm once again, folks. I've got some new software here, and I'm trying to get used to it. And I think we're going to be okay, but just bear with me as we get going. Okay, I think I've got everything set up. Now we're ready to go. So there's your basic. This is your basic Hebrew worldview. This is what we find in Scripture. All right, so we're going to take what we find in Scripture. We're going to try to figure out, is this the reality? Is this intended to be the reality? Does this somehow exhibit the limitations of the scientific minds or advancements of the people of this age? So what we're going to have to do to understand that is we're going to have to look at the worldview of these ancient Hebrews, understand what was their worldview. Then we'll look at what their cosmology is, and that'll help us understand what are we really looking at here. All right. Oh boy. Let's dive into it. It's going to be fun, folks. We're going to have a good time with this. All right, so now, of course, when we talk about this, we're going to be appealing mostly to Genesis. So let's get into it. The Bible's opening narrative introduces the Bible's main character, which is God. Specifically in this text, Elohim, which seems to be a plural. We'll get into that discussion later. There's some would say that plural it indicates the triune nature of God. Some say, no, that's not the triune nature of God. That's actually speaking to the heavenly host, God and his other created beings, the angels, in a divine council. Some would say that. Both of those make sense. Which is another good question to find out where at your own church or in your own Bible study group or whatever, to just find out what people think about that plural term Elohim. How does especially if you're a member of a church, it would be interesting just to find out from your pastor or your elders, what is our position, our statement of faith regarding Elohim, this plural term for the name of God, and what do we affirm here in our church? And because it's different from church to church. We'll get into that a little more some other time. But so we get an introduction to God, the main character, and perhaps some other beings as well, some of his created beings. The creation account emphasizes God's power as he brings all things into existence through divine decree. God's creative activity occurs over 6 days. Or specifically in Scripture, the word is yom. The Hebrew word is yom. Whether or not that means a 24-hour day, that seems to be up for debate. Some think some say that it absolutely has to be a 24-hour day, because everywhere else the word is used, it means 24-hour day. Others will argue that no, that what's implied here is a period of time. Once again, another good question to ask. What do we affirm here at our church? You might ask. The account ends with the description of God's rest on the seventh day, or what we know as the Sabbath. The 6-day structure reflects the overall pattern that the writer gives to God's work. Creation is organized into 3 categories: the heavens, the sea and sky, and the earth. God's creative activity forms and then fills each of these categories. The focus of the creation account demonstrates how God brought order and structure to the universe. Read that again. This is very important. The focus of the creation account demonstrates how God brought order and structure into the universe. So we have to keep this in mind. Context. What is being communicated to us? Is what's being communicated to us an actual description of how the things happened, or is it demonstrating how God brought order and structure into the universe? Throughout the Bible, God's power over creation shows his sovereignty. So ultimately, we come away from this no worse for the wear, because either way, we're going to understand that God is sovereign and is the creator of it all, whatever the shape of it is. Now, in the beginning opens, Genesis 1:1 opens with the Hebrew phrase Bereshith, which is typically translated as in the beginning. There are 2 possible interpretations of this phrase: a specific, absolute beginning of all time, or a non-specific, general beginning of God's work of creation. So, in the beginning, this could imply, if we just want to consider for a minute the most common cosmological model, most commonly accepted cosmological model in the world today, the Big Bang Theory. Well, that fits here. Is this talking about God creating all? There was nothing. There was no universe. There was no thing. There was no empty space. There was nothing. There was nothing physical. There was no matter. There was no time. There was no space. And this is the best argument for the existence of God that exists. There was no time. There was no matter. There was no space. So, whatever caused that to begin had to be timeless, spaceless, and immaterial. And if this thing is created, that means it's contingent, didn't have to exist. There was a choice made to bring it in. And the only thing that can make choices is a mind. Okay, and for anything at all to exist in time, space, and matter, which is contingent, there would have to be something that's necessary, something that is beyond time, space, and matter, that is self-existent, has always existed. Remember? Timeless. We got spaceless and immaterial, but we've also got timeless, outside of time. So this gives us a best understanding of the ontology of God. How is this being existing? Okay. Now, the Hebrew word here used for God, once again, Elohim, is plural. While Elohim may be used to describe multiple deities or authors, Old Testament authors usually see the term to refer to the singular God of Israel, which we see more than 2,000 instances, such as we see right here. Now, this argument, some have argued that Elohim means multiple deities. Of course, Scripture does not allow for that. God is one. But multiple beings is still on the table. Now, the Hebrew word for create, bara, B-A-R-A, transliteration is B-A-R-A, is used in the Old Testament to refer to divine activity only. Yahweh alone serves as its grammatical subject, implying the writer wanted to emphasize that people cannot create in the way Yahweh creates, and that no other God can claim to be the creator. The verb bara also conveys the idea of ordering or determining function, suggesting God's creative activity consists of bringing proper order and function to the cosmos. Once again, what is the purpose of what we're reading here in the creation account? Is it suggesting God's creative activity consisting of bringing proper order and function to the cosmos? Or is it an actual step-by-step description of exactly what God did? Now, the heavens and the earth. This phrase refers to the entirety of creation, the heavens and the earth. So we're talking about cosmos, I guess. Here's what the universe, all that is created. The Old Testament often uses opposing word pairs to refer to a totality. Now we can see this encompassed in one word, cosmos, which is a word I believe it was possibly Plato that brought that word into existence. He coined that term. But now, first of all, and we see Genesis 1, verse 2, we see formless and empty. Nothing was there. It was formless and empty. The Hebrew term used here, tohu and bohu, describe material substance lacking boundary, order, and definition. Remember, describe material, matter, something physical that's there. Material substance that's lacking boundary, order, and definition. This would be chaos. This would be our description of chaos. And if we believe the cosmology of the day, the most widely accepted cosmological model of the day, it still supports this, because what we see is the earth, we see is the universe, all of the contingent creation winding down, moving toward, well, we see entropy taking place, things moving from a state of order to a state of disorder, moving toward a state of disorder. So, in other words, we see things cooling down. We don't see things heating up. One way to think about this is if you walked into a room that was sealed off and no one had ever been in there before, okay, just bear with me here on this thought experiment. No one had ever been in the room before. It had been sealed shut, and you're the first person to ever enter the room, and you find a cup of warm coffee and a candle burning. What does that tell you? That tells you that there must have been a beginning to this, because it's still warm. The candle has not burned all the way down. That's what we see when we look at our universe. We find a universe that seems to have begun and seems to be winding down, heading toward a state of equilibrium. We could say it that way too. In other words, that would be, actually, according to science today, that would be total heat death of the universe, the total equilibrium. That would be the death of everything. But it would still be there. The matter would still be there in that model. Now, what does the Bible mean by darkness here? In Genesis 1:2. Throughout the Bible, darkness represents evil or calamity. Here, darkness refers to the unformed and unfilled conditions of the material. Whatever material there is that's there. Now, also, we have, and you can see there in your diagram, we see the deep. The great deep is there. The Hebrew word here is tehom. Tehom refers to the primordial or primeval sea, the cosmic waters of chaos. Now, in the diagram here, you can see that is at the bottom of our diagram. The great deep is even below the foundations of the earth. It's even below Sheol. Okay, so now let's dive into, so we can understand what are the Hebrews, what are they trying to tell us? To understand what they're trying to tell us, we got to understand more about who they are. So worldview becomes very important here. So a proper interpretation of the Bible requires an understanding of the original context in which it was written. How many times we say that here over and over, especially as a layman ministry, for the moment, layman. But as a layman ministry, my goal here is to always share information. We study together. And the most important thing we can do, anyone can do, whatever your level of education, whatever your level of whatever your ability to comprehend literature or sacred scripture, we must always let context be the decider. We must always be aware of the context, which are in the verses and passages that we're reading. Who's speaking? Who's being spoken to? What are the conditions around the people who are being spoken to? What conditions is the person speaking under? This is particularly true for the Old Testament. God chose a specific time, place, and culture. And that time, place, and culture is the ancient Mediterranean and the ancient Near Eastern world of the 2nd and 1st millennia BC. Now, you'll hear a term come up some, A-N-E. Capital A, capital N, capital E. That might come up sometimes today. When you hear that, if I happen to say that, all that means is ancient Near East. Same place. So the ancient Mediterranean and ancient Near Eastern world of the 2nd and 1st millennia BC. It's within 2,000 years before the birth of Jesus, in which to inspire faithful persons to produce what we read in the Old Testament. Understanding their worldview leads to more faithful understanding on our part, since misinterpretations result from assuming that the biblical writers thought, believed, and acted as we do. Let me grab a text for you right quick. I want to share a book with you. Now, here's a text that I've used for preparation for this video, and one that I would recommend here. This is Randolph Richards, Brandon J. O'Brien. Misreading, my blinds are not working over there. Anyway, misreading Scripture with Western eyes. Recovering cultural blinders to better understand the Bible. Another one that we could throw into the Armor of Truth book club. And I'm telling you, this is a good text. It has a lot to say about race and ethnicity too. And in the contents, what the text is good for is just reminding you about context, reminding you to always consider the context of what you're reading before you start pulling verses out and trying to apply them to things in the world. And so what this book does is to help us understand the ancient Hebrew worldview a little better, and helps us to understand what is most important about our Bible study and about how we think about Scripture. So, understanding their worldview leads to more faithful understanding on our part, of course. Since misinterpretations result from assuming that the biblical writers thought, believed, and acted as we do. They did not think, believe, and act as we do. They come from a very different time. Although this ancient world is unfamiliar to most of us, it would have been even more unfamiliar to the students of the Bible living prior to the archaeological discoveries of the late 19th and earliest 20th centuries. We are spoiled rotten with all the information we have today. We have access to so much information. There is no excuse for being an atheist today. There's none, which Romans chapter 1 tells us. There is. No one has an excuse. The languages of the ancient Sumerians, Babylonians, Egyptians, and Canaanites were deciphered within the past 200 years. Just within the past 200 years. So when you go back before 200 years ago, in some of the most important periods where the church was developing and the church fathers were writing, they didn't have access to understanding even the languages of the surrounding areas as we do today. We have an embarrassment of riches when you consider what we have available today. The intimate relationship between the Old Testament and the literature and ideas of these civilizations became accessible only after such developments in ancient history and archaeology. This opened an extraordinary window for understanding what the biblical writers actually meant. These connections are especially significant for our understanding of Genesis chapter 1 and 2. Now, I've used the term a couple times here already, cosmology. What is cosmology? It just refers simply to the way in which we understand the structure of our universe. How did it get here? Why is it here? But that question, why is it here, is not really asked that much by the scientific community. They're not really concerned with that. What does it all mean? They're not too concerned with that. The biblical writer's concept of how the heavens and the earth were structured by God represents a particular cosmology. This cosmology involves ideas about where God dwells within the known universe, as we call it, and reflects the writer's experience or understanding of the world, not necessarily historical or scientific facts. Not here in this section. Remember, context. Context. Some will argue that Genesis is historical text. Others will argue that Genesis, this creation account specifically, We're talking about the creation account. Obviously, throughout Genesis, there are historical stories there. But when we're talking about the creation account, some will argue that this is well, let me just keep reading here. It'll say right here in just a minute. This cosmology involves ideas about where God dwells within the known universe. For instance, this word universe. This is our word. The word cosmos didn't exactly mean that. But anyway, this God dwells within the known universe and reflects the writer's experience or understanding of the world. Once again, not necessarily historical or scientific facts. See, what I meant to say a second ago is that some will argue that Genesis, that the creation account is wisdom literature, kind of like Job. Not necessarily an actual event, but a type of prose that is intended to relay a very specific message. For example, cosmologies include descriptions about places and events that humans do not experience until death. So cosmologies can pontificate on what's beyond time, space, and matter also. Now, as I said a moment ago, the most commonly accepted cosmological model of today is the Big Bang Theory, which says it all came into existence out of nothing. It didn't all pop into existence in a universe. The universe, all of it, there was nothing. There was no thing, nothing. And it all came into existence from nothing. That is the most commonly accepted cosmological model today. And what's fascinating to me is the blind spot many scientists who happen to be atheists have for how did it come into existence out of nothing? See, that's the question. Now, of course, some theoretical physicists will make claims. Roger Penrose has an idea, has a cosmology or an explanation that says that the universe is cyclical. That even this universe came into existence, but there was one that existed before it. So they kind of collapse on each other and then expand and collapse and expand and collapse. The problem with that is that we don't really have evidence. It's a good theory. It's an interesting theory. But we don't really have much evidence. And it still doesn't provide any argument against the existence of God. Now, as far as Old Testament cosmology, the Israelites believed in a universe structure that was common among the civilizations of the Near East. So, the Babylonian cosmology, very similar to the Hebrew. This structure included three parts: a heavenly realm for the gods, an earthly realm for humans, and an underworld for the dead. The vocabulary of the Israelites, of their cosmology, is also similar to that found in the literature of Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Canaan. The three tiers are reflected in the Ten Commandments. You shall not, for example, you shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. Exodus 20, verse 4, that's in the Decalogue. And you can also compare there Psalm 33, verses 6 through 8, Proverbs 8, verses 27 through 29. But this cosmology is also affirmed in Philippians chapter 2, verse 10, and Revelation 5, 3. Now, what is meant by the heavens? In Genesis chapter 1, verses 6 through 8, we see a basic understanding of the heavens. And God said, "Let there be a vaulted dome, rakia, in the midst of the waters, and let it cause a separation between the waters." So God made the vaulted dome, and he caused a separation between the waters, which were under the vaulted dome, the rakia, and between the waters, which were over the vaulted dome. And it was so. And God called the vaulted dome heaven. The vaulted dome was believed to be solid and thought to hold back the waters above it, preventing them from falling on the earth. Now, the vaulted dome, sometimes called the firmament, you can see on your diagram there where the firmament is. It's that darker line around the top. So this vaulted dome, sometimes referred to as the firmament and sometimes equated with the sky, was seen as connecting to foundations that went deep below the sea, the foundations of the earth. The dome surrounded the earth with its edge meeting at the horizon. The boundary between light and darkness, you can compare Job 26:10 and Proverbs 8:27. This explains verses like, when he made skies from above, when he founded fountains of the deep, from Proverbs 8:28, for example. And, quote, with God, can you spread out the skies hard as a molten mirror? Job 37:18. The vaulted dome was thought to be supported by the tops of mountains because the peaks appeared to touch the sky. For example, 2 Samuel 22:8. And the heavens had doors and windows through which rain or the waters above could flow upon the earth from their storehouse above the dome. Once again, Genesis chapter 7, verse 11, Genesis 8, verse 2, Psalm 78, verse 23, Psalm 33:7. Once again, we're describing the cosmology of the ancient Near East in their time. Genesis chapter 1 describes waters above and below the solid firmament, a belief also reflected in Psalm 148. God was thought to dwell above the firmament, as described in Job 22:14. Quote, thick clouds are a covering for him so that he does not see, and he walks about on the dome of heaven. Now, what is now? If we're going as we're thinking about this, we want to think: are they really giving us a point by point physical description of what's going on? Because in Scripture, and even down through the development of the text that will become the canon of Scripture, it has become clear that God is timeless, spaceless, and immaterial, that God is spirit, Scripture says, and must be worshipped in spirit and truth. So this gives us an indication that what we're actually being given here is not an actual physical description of what's happening. It's an explanation. It's a prosaic effort at helping people who would mostly be illiterate to understand what's being said. In other words, I might offer, this is symbolic. It's a symbolic explanation. Because we know God to be the Creator has to be outside of time, space, and matter. So he's not walking around on the top of the firmament. As far as I know. Nothing's impossible with God, though. Now, what about the earth in the ancient Near Eastern cosmology? The earth sat atop the watery deep. You see there in your outline. The waters below refers not only to waters that humans use, but also the deeper abyss. Thus, the earth was seen as surrounded by and floating upon the seas. Genesis 1, chapters 9 and 10. Having arisen out of the water. The earth was thought to, now having risen out of the water, which you can find that reference in 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 5. The earth was thought to be held fast by pillars or sunken foundations. 1 Samuel chapter 2, Job 38, once again, Psalm 104. And you can see those foundations at the left and right, on the left and right sides. You can imagine that we're looking at a cross-section of this example, which would also be, interestingly enough, looks like a globe in a way, of course, but of course we're not implying that here. We're just this is a way to visualize what's being said. Okay, now, so you can see the foundations. You can see there on either side. Just imagine that, of course, going around. So in a way, there's still symbolically explaining or describing something that would be round, I guess. I don't know. What do you think? What do you think? Now, what about the underworld, according to the ancient Near East? Cosmology of the ancient Near Easterns. The realm of the dead was believed to be located under the earth. You can see there, Sheol. The most frequent Hebrew term for this place was Sheol, often translated in English Bibles as Sheol, or translated as the realm of the dead, or even as the grave. And I would suggest probably the grave is maybe the better term there. At times, the Hebrew word for earth, eretz, is also used to describe the underworld, since graves were believed to represent gateways to the underworld. In Job, the realm of the dead is even described in watery terms. The spirits, it says this, quote, "The spirits of the dead tremble below the waters and their inhabitants." That's Job 26:5. And Jonah's description is perhaps the most vivid. Although he is located in the belly of a great fish, Jonah says he is in the underworld, the watery deep, at quote, "the foundations of the mountains," a pit that had bars and closed forever. Jonah chapter 2, verse 6. Now, this worldview shaped the Old Testament and illustrates how the Bible uses the language of its time to explain its perspective, but most importantly, as always, to glorify Yahweh, or to glorify God. Now, okay, so that gives us an understanding of the Old Testament and ancient Near Eastern worldviews. So now let's continue working down through Genesis now a bit. Chapter 1, verse 4, where God calls his handiwork good. 7 times he calls it good. Throughout the whole passage in verses 4, 10, 12, 18, 21, 25, and 31. The Hebrew word used here is tov, T-O-V, and it has a broad range of meaning, but generally describes what is desirable, beautiful, or right. You see the problem when we try to take what's written in a very poetic style of language, and we try to interpret it into dog Latin, or the English language, which is just a utilitarian language, a scientific language, perhaps, as it is built heavily on Latin origins. So it's difficult sometimes for us to we think in literal terms because our language is constructed that way. But see, there's another example where it would be bad practice for us to assume that the people we're reading from this worldview, from this context, are thinking, or because of their language is so different, that they would, as they speak, we would be wrong. We would err to assume that they speak as we do. Now it says that God caused there to be a separation between the light and between the darkness. Now you can take that symbolically all day long, and it makes perfect sense, separating the light from the darkness. But the division of time into day and night represents one of God's first acts in the ordering of creation, dividing of time into day and night. Genesis 1, verse 5, the evening and there was morning, the first day. The expression evening and there was morning specifies a length of day. Once again, this English word day is translated from the Hebrew word yom, that is transliterated into English as Y-O-M. While the author may have meant a 24-hour day, less specific interpretations are possible. So let me just say right here, let us not catch ourselves dividing over this issue as to whether or not this Hebrew cosmology is in effect right now. This is, in fact, the way it is, versus those those Christians who might accept the most commonly accepted cosmological model of our day. Where it becomes a salvation issue is where we need to be concerned. But up until that point, there is no need for division over it. Now, of course, here this Hebrew term, yom, can refer to a 24-hour cycle, the daylight hours, or an unspecified future someday. One of the examples of this when I hear you could think of anyone from history, or let's just use George Washington, for example. They say George Washington had dentures. He had wooden teeth. So when they say in his day, dentures were made out of wood, does that mean that in his one day, or does that mean in his day, his lifetime? So and I'm not imposing on you that that's what you need to take from it. I'm just saying these are the way people are thinking about this. I'm not here to tell you. I'm not here to tell you what you need to think about this. I'm just presenting it for you as best I can. I'm trying to keep my own. My own personal perspective, to the side, as much as I possibly can. The meaning of the word yom, though, the word we translate today, does not settle the debate over whether the passage references a literal 6-day creation or symbolic days. In addition, the sun, which marks the change from evening to morning, has not been created yet, but there is light. Now, this is easy. This is easy because we understand God is light. We understand that in the new heavens and new earth, apparently the sun and moon are gone because there's no need for them. There's always light. Is it going to be hard to sleep in the new heavens and new earth? Will we sleep in the new heavens and new earth? Just fun little things to contemplate. Okay, now there are several ways to interpret this term day. I'm not going to get into that too much here, but I'll just tell you that you can interpret it as 24-hour days. You can refer to it as this term yom as a day age, that it means a long period of time. Progressive creation is an option. In other words, that creation over 6 24-hour days, each of which was separated by long periods of time. That's another interesting one. That creative activity was intermittently punctuated by eons of time. Things happened all at once, and then things went quiet for a long time. And then things happened all at once again. That would be the idea of progressive creation. And also a literary framework. The days of Genesis don't describe a linear sequence of 24-hour days. Genesis 1 conveys a structured outline of creation activity, where the description of days 1, 2, and 3 conceptually parallel days 4, 5, and 6. So that's another way that this is interpreted. Also, Yom is interpreted as revelatory days. The 6 days described in Genesis are 24-hour periods or less, but creation did not occur on those days. Rather, over the course of 6 days, God revealed to the writer how he created the heavens and earth. There's another interesting one, right? That the one that's actually writing this down as inspired is writing, this is what happened on the first day that I was writing this. And then on the second day, as God was talking to me, this is what he said happened. That's very interesting, right? I mean, that is logical. That makes sense. And we also have the analogical interpretation of that word yom or day, which says that these 6 days of creation are an analogy for the normal human work week preceding the Sabbath. And, okay, we also have the idea, the interpretation of a religious polemic, which the creation described in Genesis 1 reflects ancient pre-scientific cosmology, not science. How one understands the days is irrelevant to the actual purpose of the account. To assert which deity deserves credit for creation while denigrating the claims of rival deities associated with the cosmology and its descriptive elements. So you've probably heard one version of several of these. How many of these here? 1, 2, 3, 4. So there's 7. There's 7 different ways, popular ways that you find written up in scholarly journals and reports about this. That 7 ways that this term Yom can be reasonably interpreted. Once again, the problem is, from English, this utilitarian dog Latin that we speak, it's kind of hard to understand what the visual in the mind of the person who's writing that word Yom is having, so. Now let's get back to the topic at hand. A vaulted dome. In Genesis 1, verse 6, get this firmament, this vaulted dome. The Hebrew word here, rakia, refers to a dome-like structure. You can't get around it. That's what it refers to. That was thought to separate the sky from the heavens. You can see that there once again on the darker, around the top, just under the darker part there. That's considered that vaulted dome or that firmament. Genesis 1, 9 through 13. The third day of creation involves 2 more distinct acts of creation. Both are affirmed with the phrase, quote, and God saw that it was good, unquote. The first 3 days of creation are characterized by 3 acts of separation. God separates light from darkness, verse 4. He separates heaven from earth, verses 7 and 8, and separates land from sea, verses 9 and 10. Now, let's talk about that. Waters under heaven, verse 1, or chapter 1, verse 9. The writer explicitly distinguishes the waters of the sea from the waters above the expanse because of the ancient Near Eastern view that the sky held back the waters above. So what about dry ground? The Hebrew term here is yabasha, I think. And it's used to distinguish the safety of dry ground from the chaotic danger of sea. Remember, now, to the ancients, the sea was an extremely scary place. So much so that in their mind, we see that they thought of it as chaotic. So the term here is for dry ground, implies safety. The term appears several times in the account of Moses and the Israelites safely crossing the Red Sea on dry ground. So dry ground here implies safety. I can stand here. Now, verses 11 through 13. This passage refers to the creation of plant life, but it does not cover all botanical varieties. Similarly, the list of animals we see in Genesis 1, 20 through 25, does not represent all categories of animal life. Both lists are selective. Here we see in verses 11 through 13, the seed-bearing plants and fruit trees likely represent only the plants designated for human consumption. It's practical. Let the earth produce green. God's command for vegetation to grow is the first indirect command in the creation sequence. Previously, God had directly addressed each created being. Now he commands the earth to produce plant life. Now, verses 14 through 18, God creates the sun and moon on the 4th day. The sun, moon, and stars provide the daily and seasonal cycles required for agriculture that, combined with land and water, sustain life. Now, this is where we get into, people start thinking about, in our society today, it's become very popular again to read the stars. They're put there for signs and seasons. They're a clock. They're a very accurate clock, but nothing more. Nothing more. The idea that that those created things, those creations, those material creations have some power, well, is absurd. So what is meant by lights? These lights. The creation of lights in the heavens on the fourth day parallels the creation of light in general on the first day. These lights produce another separation, day from night. And therefore, signs, appointed times, what is meant by signs. Celestial phenomena were often understood as divine signs in the ancient Near Eastern view. Appointed times, here in verse 14, appointed times. The Hebrew word used here is, in my best assumption here, it's mo'adim. It's mo'adim. It could refer to seasons, indicating the natural agricultural cycle, but mo'adim also frequently indicates religious festivals or sacred times. And then in verse 16, we get the two great lights. You can see them there in your diagram. This refers to the sun and the moon, but the writer deliberately avoids the words sun, or shemesh in Hebrew, and moon, which is yarich, I think, in Hebrew. Shemesh and yarich, sun and moon, that correspond to the names of West Semitic deities, Shamash and Yarich. So why don't they just say sun and moon? Once again, the idea here is that the writer deliberately avoids using these words because they correspond to the names of other deities or false gods. Now, Genesis chapter 1, verses 20 through 25, creation on the fifth day includes the creatures of the sky and sea. God creates land, animals on the sixth day. These creative acts parallel the activity on the second day when God separates sky and sea, and the third day when land appears. Living creatures, verse 20. The Hebrew term, nephesh, here refers to animal life. What is nephesh? Well, the Hebrew word nephesh, often translated as soul, can refer to animal life. It can also refer to human life or a person's life force or their soul, along with their emotions, intellect, personality, and human will. Nephesh can also refer to human corpses. See that from Numbers, verse 6. All right. Lost my place. Hang on with me, folks. Bear with me just a second. Okay, so we're down here in Nephesh. All right. Old Testament anthropology. What about anthropology? Now, if we're thinking about creation, we got to understand the worldview of the people that are describing this. So, what about, how were these people thinking about anthropology? Or the study of human beings. In the Old Testament, humans are consistently portrayed as the fusion of an immaterial life force and a body of flesh. We get possibly the formula for creating a living soul when we see God takes the dust, forms it, and breathes life into it. Now, is that an actual point-by-point physical description of what happened, or is that a very effective symbolic description of the creation of a living soul, being that God creates it. Neither part on its own constitutes a living person, only the whole. So a body without a soul is not a living person. A soul without a body is not a living person. There are two main terms used to describe the immaterial part of humans: soul, or nephesh, and spirit, which we've talked about here, which is ruach. However, the various meanings of the terms can make interpretation a little hairy. So the Old Testament terms for soul, nephesh, and spirit, ruach, are consistently used to identify either the life force, the fact that the body is living, or attributes that are dependent upon brain function, such as emotions, intelligence, and conscience. So it's either talking about the actual person, the actual living soul and person, or it's saying this is what a living soul can do. It can think, it can have emotions. These terms can refer to those both, you see. Once again, we're talking about a very poetic type language, and we're trying to interpret it into this utilitarian dog Latin. The terms are used interchangeably. Genesis introduces another term that refers to the life force, which is neshama. It is used in the only description of the origin of the soul, in which God animates the first human. That's where we see neshama, the first human, who is Adam, which means man, by breathing into him the breath of life, which is neshama. Genesis 2, verse 7. You can compare that with Joshua 11:11. So while animals are not said to be animated in the same way, they are described as having the nephesh and the ruach, but not the neshama. But what about humans? While certain New Testament, now, humans in the New Testament anyway, that's just our understanding in the Old Testament. What about in the New Testament? New Testament passages seem to contradict the Old Testament regarding the immaterial nature of human beings. This is not actually the case. For example, in Hebrews 4:12, refers to the Word of God's ability to divide the soul and spirit. However, this does not indicate an actual division between the soul and spirit. Rather, the verse claims that the Word of God can penetrate the inner person in such a way, not that such a division exists prior to its work. Soul and spirit are no more separated in Hebrews 4:12 than bone and marrow, found in the same verse. Okay, so this a little bit about this. We're going to stick to ancient Near East, Old Testament. What is meant by sea creatures here? Verse 21, a translation of the Hebrew word tanin, which does not refer to any specific member of the aquatic kingdom, just a general description. Verse 22, be fruitful and multiply. God created life to be fertile. Here, the capacity for sexual reproduction is cast as a divine blessing that has been taken and completely perverted into something that can be, in many cases, ugly and look evil today. Human trafficking, for example. The creation of man and woman is the epitome. It is the climax of God's creative activity. The statement that the creation of the animals was good in Genesis 1:25 distinguishes God's two acts of creation on the sixth day. First, he creates land animals in general. Then he creates humans. The passage contains several key words and concepts. God's reference to himself in the plural, the concept of the image of God, us, we being his image bearers, we carry his image. The separation of humanity into two genders, male and female, and you're not getting around that. I don't care how emotional you get or how loud you scream, you're going to be male or female, one of the two. And the divine command for humanity to fill and rule the earth. The divine command for humanity to fill and rule the earth. To be good stewards, for sure, but to rule the earth. Not that the earth should rule us. Agenda 21, the agenda for the 21st century, promotes this idea that the earth is in control, that the earth is God. But very plainly, in the creation account, we see very clearly that God has put man above the earth. Now, of course, does that mean we're supposed to destroy it? No. We should be good stewards of it. But we're not to take up this practice that's being falsely laid out in front of us and worship the earth or let the earth somehow determine our path. Let me just address this let us make. Verse 26. Let us make. The occurrence of us in this passage has been understood to refer to the plurality of the Godhead. For example, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. That is one view. This understanding would have been unknown to the authors of the Old Testament. So, now, remember, context. Those who were writing this, not yet aware of the triune nature of God. So just keep that in mind if you're going to be true to the context, which is the first rule of exegesis is context. The first three rules: context, and also context. Okay, but another possible explanation is the so-called plural of majesty. Now, this type of grammatical usage is more common for nouns and adjectives than verbs. But a simpler explanation is that us, let us make him and man in our image, reflects an announcement by the single God of Israel to a group in his presence. Speaking to people in his presence. Or the heavenly host. This is the position you'll hear Michael Heiser argue for very well. Other Old Testament passages support the idea of a heavenly host or a divine council. This is the divine council. That's the position that Michael Heiser takes. And you can see Psalm 29:1 for references there. Also Psalm 82:1. This explanation also applies to Genesis 11:7. The phrase "our image" then means that the members of the heavenly host also reflect the divine image. Okay. Now, the plural language associated with the image of God, let us make humankind in our image, has drawn much attention. Common interpretations include the following options: plurality within God, or the Trinity, the triune Godhead, or like we just said, the plural of majesty, self-deliberation on God's part. Wow. Well, what is this likeness of God, this image of God? It distinguishes people from all other earthly creation. God's image is not described as being possessed in part or given gradually. Rather, it is an immediate and inherent part of being human. It's interesting because even those people who've rejected God, who hate God, they bear his image. And what about male and female? There is no status distinction among bearers of the divine image. They are equal while having distinct capacities and roles in fulfilling the divine mandate to steward the earth. Our mandate is to steward the earth. That is to subdue it, to work it, because that's how we feed ourselves after the fall. We have to work for our food, so we have to subdue the earth. It is not meant for us to be off the land, as Agenda 21, the Green New Deal, this false environmentalist movement of the day, specifically really the globalist movement. This is what they're promoting. It's their way of getting people into hives, into cities, so that they can easily be controlled, easily be exacted. subdue it and rule over it. These terms in verse 28 indicate active power or rule involving physical force or effort. Okay. Okay, so now we won't get too much farther in there because we're focusing here on what is this Hebrew cosmology. Now let's go in specifically on the diagram you have on your screen there. Let's talk about that. So first of all, let's look at the heavens. Up here, right there. You can see that happening up there. It's a pretty cool graphic, isn't it? Okay, so the heavens. What in the world? What in heaven's name do they mean here? What about heavens? What are we talking about here? So the heavens and the heaven of heavens are the domain of God and the angels above the solid firmament, according to this ancient Near Eastern cosmology. Once again, you have to consider, is this an exact description or a symbolic account coming once again from a language that is very poetic? In other words, it uses prose to get points across. Because remember, we're talking to people who are mostly illiterate because there was no real reason for them to be able to read and write as they were, especially when you think about the Israelites coming out of Egypt, they were slaves. And then we have the gate of heaven right here. Let me point to that for you. Right here, the gate of heaven, right there, that little tube right there, the little opening in the heavens, which is the gate of heaven. This is the entrance in the firmament through which access to heaven is obtained. Your scripture, your support verse here is Revelation 4:1. Next, we have the waters above the firmament. Right there. Very specific account here. Waters above the firmament. The ancient Israelites divided the world into, once again, into heaven, earth, and sea, and the underworld. There you go. There's the waters above the firmament, called the Sea of Glass in Revelation 4:6, and a pavement of sapphire in Exodus 24:9 and 11. This expanse of crystal clear water forms the foundation of heaven. Psalm 104:3 says that Yahweh sets beams in the waters for his upper chambers. And Psalm 29:3 says that Yahweh's voice thunders from over these waters. So there is the waters above the firmament. So there should be, in this cosmology, if this cosmology was a literal description, there should be waters above our head. Now, the way I think about this is if you consider for a moment our atmosphere. Let's think about it for a minute. Let's just be sticklers for a second. Think about the ocean. That's clearly water. Now, when you get to the surface of the ocean, right above the surface of the ocean, you have a pretty dense atmosphere. What is the atmosphere? It's most certainly full of water. It has to be. We couldn't exist on a planet where there was no moisture in the air. That would be horrible. So think of this for a minute. There are waters. Well, it's just a gradient of waters. If you go up out of the sea and you come out of the water, you're still in water. It's just less dense. And then as you go higher and higher, the amount of water becomes less and less dense. I don't know, that's just interesting to think about, but things that I think about sometimes. Okay, now, the firmament, right there. So the sky was viewed as a vaulted dome or a firmament resting on foundations at its edges. Once again, these foundations are here, and they go around in this circular, all around. Perhaps these are mountains. Perhaps they're seeing these as mountains with doors and windows that let in the rain. This hard dome separated the waters above from the waters below. Once again, that's fascinating. It's really interesting when you think about this, and then you think about how we view. It's not all that different in some ways. Now we've got the heavenly bodies. We got these things here. We've got the stars, and we've got the lesser and greater light. The sun, moon, and stars were thought to ride in tracks. KJV says courses. Judges 5:20. These sun and moon would ride in tracks in the firmament, and in the flat Earth model that's been going around for several years, you kind of see that. You kind of see that that's something that was. It's hard to assume. It's hard to know whether or not that model was created with Hebrew cosmology in mind, or whether it was created just separately with someone's own ideas, which would be hard to do because you would be influenced by this. You would just about have to be influenced by this if you're creating a flat Earth model. Neighboring cultures revered these lights in the sky as powerful deities, and they still do today. But the Israelites are warned. In other words, God warns his people specifically, don't do that. Deuteronomy 4:19. So interesting about the heavenly bodies. The greater light, the lesser light, and the lights. Heavenly bodies. And then we get to the land. We get to the earth. The world was viewed as a disk floating on the waters, secured or moored by pillars. Psalm 136:6 says that the earth is spread out above the waters. So there's our earth, where we walk around and have our lives. Next, we have the foundations of the heavens. Now, this is not the foundations of the earth. This is the foundation of the heavens over here. See, that would be the perhaps the mountains or whatever that would be circling, or the Antarctic, the ice or whatever that would be considered in that spot. The edge of the firmament which holds up the heavens and the waters above the earth rests on these foundations. This is the circle of the earth. The horizon which separates night and day. The circle of the earth that we see Isaiah 40:22 and Job 26:10. This circle of the earth, or the horizon which separates night and day. That would be these things. Which you can see, once again, let me make clear, there's not just two things here. This is a cross section, so they would go all the way around this circle of the earth. And this is what is meant in the Hebrew cosmology by the circle of the earth. Now we've got the foundations of the earth. Down here, all of this. This is not Sheol. Sheol is a part of this. The grave, or whatever, the underworld is a part of this. But this is the foundations of the earth. The earth is imagined as floating over the great deep sea. And so next there we have Sheol, we have the grave. The underworld, or Sheol, was a watery or dusty prison from which no one returned. So this is death. Regarded as a physical place beneath the earth. It could be reached only through death. Now, they weren't necessarily burying their people underground all the time. Sometimes it would be in caves. So you can imagine if you were in the practice of burying your dead in caves. Just for an example, just as a thought experiment. This would seem to make sense. We're burying our people in the in this Sheol that's down in the foundations of the earth. Symbolic. And then we have, of course, the great deep down here at the bottom, which is, in the Hebrew cosmology, which is the primordial ocean. You can check Genesis 1, verse 2, Genesis 8, 2, Psalm 74. And also in Job 26, 10 and 11, Job describes how Yahweh inscribed a circle on the surface of the water, stilled the sea, and defeated Rahab, a mythical sea monster, in all the process creating the earth. You can see also there, you can check also Psalm 89. Okay, so let's look at 3 key verses that talk about cosmology in Scripture. Genesis 1, verses 1 and 2. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters. Now, what do we understand now that we've looked at this a little bit, the Hebrew cosmology? How does the Hebrew cosmology look at water, great bodies of water, as chaos, as danger? And so, in the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters, of the chaos. Colossians chapter 1, verse 16. Because all things in the heavens and on the earth were created by him, things visible and things invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or powers, all things were created through him and for him. Created for who? For whom? Created for us? No, it was created through him and for him. We have to remember our place in the story. And also Revelation 21, verse 1, where it says, And I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea did not exist any longer. What is our context here? We're looking at this through the context of the Hebrew cosmology. Go deeper on this, but I think that's probably a decent foundation, if you will, for what we want to talk about here, for what we want to understand when we think about this. So, how do we want to think about this? If you're someone who let me just say, if you're a flat earther, and that term, the term's not really, a flat earther doesn't sound right. If you're someone who is not sure that the model of the earth that we've been presented with is accurate, how did you come to that? Let's call it problem, because there's something to be solved there. All of a sudden, we're not sure about something that we thought we knew to be sure. So, how did you come about that? Where did you? Was it Scripture that led you to that understanding? Was it someone outside of Scripture? Was it someone who was convincing, very convincing? Is it ridiculous to make an argument for the earth being a flat plane? I don't think it's ridiculous. I don't think it's unscientific. I'm not personally convinced by it, but I don't think it's irrelevant. I think it's very relevant to ask those questions. And now for me personally, the reason, just my own perspective on it here, the reason that I'm not convinced is two things. My personal experience. When I stand at the beach, maybe I'm wrong, but when I look out over and I can see 180 degrees from, or maybe even more, from left to right. If you're out on an island, you can see even more. But I perceive a curve. Maybe that's just my mind playing tricks on me. But I perceive a curve to be there. So, two reasons why I'm not convinced that the earth is a flat plane is that one, my own senses. And when I fly in an airplane, it looks curved to me. That could be the window playing a trick. I don't know, but those are my senses. They could be wrong. But secondly, I'm also not convinced that the earth is a flat plane because the way we read this scripture here. We come to understand that we're looking at an ancient Near Eastern cosmology. And I think to throw this into the realm of a scientific explanation for what happened at creation could be a bridge too far. But I'm not going to cut off my relationships with people who do affirm it as being literal. I would prefer it to be literal. One day we'll find out. So let's see what you guys are up to over here in this chat room. I am curious to know what you guys are talking about over here. So that was about an hour and a half of me going on and on about Genesis and Hebrew cosmology. So I didn't know if I could go on that long about that stuff. Now, I'm interested to see what you have to say here because I'm quite familiar with many of the arguments, even the objections. And I'm really interested to, let's see here, talk to you guys, find out how you're thinking. So let me scroll back up, not too far here in the chat, but Hey, there's Ron McCaffrey, very popular name around Carolina these days. Ron McCaffrey says that Michelson-Morley experiments assumed a spherical rotating Earth. Learn about the subject before attempting to use it as evidence. Okay. Thanks, Ron McCaffrey, for being there. That's Michelson-Morley experiments are certainly interesting. Dankbud says the Earth-shaped debate causes so many people to get heated. Does, and unnecessarily so. Come on, there's no reason to be arguing about it. Is there some reason to get mad at one another because of the shape of the earth? Really? Are you that bored? Can't think of anything else in the world to discuss or to get angry about. Anything worse, anything that you might want to spend your time focusing on at that level. Yeah, this is not product placement. I just like fried chicken. Here's Robert Shortman with us. He says it's a scientist and brainwashing through controlled education. Now, I'm not going to disagree with you that the education system is most certainly suspect. And I would just say this, for example, creation and evolution both appeal to good science. Why are they not both taught side by side? Now, whether or not you affirm evolution or not, there are Christians who are theistic evolutionists. As long as you're using science to make your case, to make your argument, good science, and you're not appealing to fantasy, you're using science, why in the world? Why in the world would the topic not even be allowed to be brought up in public school? I'm talking about creation science. Why not? Because it appeals to a deity. It appeals to God, a creator. Let's just say generally, it doesn't necessarily appeal to Christianity. It just appeals to natural theology, that there is a creator God. So why would they be so afraid? Why would they be so adamant about keeping creation science out of public school? It's perfectly legitimate. For instance, when you look at the Grand Canyon, for example, you can make a scientific case for that happening over long periods of time. You can make I think maybe even a better scientific case for that happening in a very short period of time as the result of a flood. And I say that, and I'm not even actually convinced whether or not the flood was global. I'm not sure. For the same reason as what we've just talked about here, the Hebrew cosmology was not the same as ours. They don't view creation the same way as we do. Rob Tick bringing a good comment here. He says, I'm no expert. Exactly. And, none of us really are when it comes to this. We're experts in little areas, but over the whole overall, no. There's Rosie Clower. Very interesting conversation. It is. I think so too, Rosie. Here's Ron McCaffrey again. Says, a superior mirage is calculable, predictable, and observable, but it does not occur all the time. You're basing evidence on a phenomenon that isn't consistent. I wonder if you're assuming that I'm making the case for flat Earth here. You might not be. You might just be maybe just throwing up some points, but I'm not arguing for flat Earth, by the way. I mean, I'm not saying this is you, Ron McCaffrey, but sometimes people will just see a thumbnail. They'll see the flat Earth model and they say, oh, here's a flat Earth. They're talking about flat Earth. Well, I'm talking about flat Earth, but I've just said I'm not convinced that the Earth is an infinite plane. But number one, nothing is infinite. There is nothing in the contingent creation, nothing within time, space, and matter, which clearly had a beginning, is infinite. It's absurd. For example, for something to be infinite, we're talking about contingent things in time, space, and matter right now. It would have had to have existed before it existed. It would have had to have created itself. God is the only being with an ontology that can create time, space, and matter. With an ontology that is self-existent. That is what Yahweh means. I am that I am that I am that I am. I've always been. Critical Mass says, people defending the magic ball get most heated. I remember I flipped when someone told me I was a NASA fanboy from way back. Yeah, there's some that I don't... I have a real hard time trusting a lot of what comes out of NASA. Especially in the past 20 years. And I'm not basing that because about any perception I have about whether space is fake or not. I look at the way they behave. And these people that were supposedly behind the Mars rover, they act like actors. They don't act like scientists. Like when you see the camera on them as the Mars rover is supposedly, I have a hard time believing that we've sent anything to Mars. Why would they do that? I don't know, man. We live in the crazy world. We've seen just this year in 2020 that huge lies can be perpetrated on great numbers of people pretty easily. So, I don't know. If you ever watch, I got Richard D. Hall. Richard D. Hall's YouTube channel, if he's still got it up there, but you can check his website too. Has done a good job covering just this stuff on the Mars rover stuff. Just not necessarily the science behind. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about these people who claim to be the scientists and how you see them behaving. Come on, man. Those people, They're not the ones responsible. That's my opinion. Here's a Plane of Confusion is with us. Good to see you out there. Thanks for joining us. Plane of Confusion says, I just advise people to keep doing your own independent research. Practice scientific method. Ask him for guidance. Pseudoscience is everywhere, not just the earth lie. Well, yeah, I mean, I agree with about all of you, what you said there. The thing I would probably push back on a little bit is I don't think it's useful for us to call out the earth lie. If you're talking about, I'm not sure if you're talking about the flat earth lie or the globe earth lie or which side you're on there, but most certainly pseudoscience is everywhere. Once again, in 2020, we have seen pseudoscience and scientism rise to the top and be accepted just out of fear. We're following the scientists. I'm voting for science. All that stuff you hear today, no, you're not. No, you're not. You're voting for a political ideology, and you're listening to scientists who say things that support that political ideology. You're not listening to science at all. But anyway, I would be hesitant to call it a lie. Because, listen, there are people who, I don't necessarily think it's a lie. I think it's just become a predominant teaching. Dankbud says in reality there's not much evidence on both sides. I might disagree there and say that there's so much evidence on both sides that it all seems to wash out in the end. But I know what you mean. Ron McCaffrey says there is no evidence that proves the earth is flat. Okay, I'm with that. That's, like I said, I'm not convinced. I'm certainly not convinced that it's an infinite plane. Infinity is not a concept for the real world where matter exists. That's a concept for mathematics. It's a placeholder. But infinity is an absurd notion inside a closed universe, which is where we live. Get around that. That's where we live. So yeah, I'm not. So I would agree there. I'm not really convinced. So the infinite plane makes no sense. But whether the Earth is a plane or not, that seems to be at least a more plausible argument than an infinite plane. And I'm telling you, man, the pictures of the Chicago skyline from across the lake, that is interesting. That's interesting. I'm perfectly able to accept atmospheric lensing for that effect. I don't know. It just, that's why I'm not. That's why I would never sit here and say that flat Earth cosmology is not scientific. There is certainly science there. You can certainly make arguments for it. Ultimately, though, at the end of the day, you have to be convinced by the argument. Personally, individually. And I'm not. I'm not convinced. Now, am I completely convinced that we're on a a globe? I probably lean more that way. But it's difficult, because we live, listen, we participate in a hyper-real world most of our lives today. Most of the time, we've got this going on, and we're always looking into a screen. We're always thinking about things that are inside a screen. Very rarely these days are we actually just looking at our world, at the real world, the actual territory. In other words, the map has become the territory. It's a hyper-real existence that we all seem to embrace today. Maybe not all of us, but most of us in modern society are bought into a hyper-real, a hyper-reality. How do we know that for sure? Look at 2020. How many people have been frightened to death so frightened that they will go out and jog with a mask on their face. That's because they've been so influenced by a hyper-real event, an event that's only really occurring in the hyper-real, away from the actual territory. I like it. We've got both going on here. We've got Ron here with there's no evidence that proves the earth is flat. We've got my brother here, critical mass, and there is no evidence that proves I'm on a ball. See that? This is where we can't let ourselves divide over it, but we can be edified if we just engage one another compassionately and not listen, man. The worst thing we can do is to get angry and pissed off at one another because someone thinks the earth is a globe or because someone thinks the earth is flat. Are you going to get mad about that? That happens a lot. I'm not saying that's what's happening here. I'm just saying that does happen a lot. But I'm happy to see there are both opinions existing here in the chat. Here's Robert Shortman again. Says Sheol could be all the people remains before the great flood. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense too. Miss Ostrich responding to Nana P. Here says gravity versus levity is interesting. Yeah, this is a good point. When we think about gravity, we think we know so much that we can make definitive claims about great mysteries. We really don't know that much here in our finite minds who've been here for this little amount of time in this big time span. Or in this big timeline of however long we've been here. But gravity, we can observe it. We can measure it. But we cannot explain it. We can connotatively explain it, but not denotatively. In other words, we can't get down to what is gravity? What is it? From whence does it emanate? We have theories similar to what we find in macro evolution. We have a lot of theories. But for many of us, myself included, as far as evolution, I don't see a transitional species between chimpanzees and human beings. I don't think we came from chimps. It really doesn't make much sense to me. But I'm not going to ostracize one of my brothers in Christ because he has made that argument and has spent great deal of time and effort to research it and give a good argument for it, because that is an important one, though. Created in the image of God, what does that really mean? I just have a problem with the evolution, as it says that we came out of the lower primates. And so does Charles Darwin, which he wrote at the end of his life. Let me I want to share that statement with you here. He was writing to a man named Billy Graham, or William Graham. No, I know what to do. Forget that. Let's look at a very quick video about that issue, that very issue. Because Charles Darwin even questioned his own theory that we came from the lower apes when he started to think about, wait a minute, How could I ever trust my own thought processes if I'm nothing more than a fancy ape? Oh, where's that video? Come on. There it is. Here you go. Check this out.
Your decision will matter.
Don't give me blah, blah, blah. I don't want to play advertisements. There we go. So let's check this out.
What are the qualities of a good
This is short.
worldview? It must be true. There is no virtue and there is very rarely any advantage in being wrong, right? You don't get very far that way. And in this case, true means consistent with reality. That worldview will agree with what we know and what we observe. In the correspondence theory of truth, if a belief is in clear contradiction with well-established facts about the world, then it is not true. Number two, second aspect of a good worldview, it successfully answers the important questions that humans ask, such as, what is the prime reality? What is the nature of God? Secondly, what am I? What am I doing here? What is this all about? Third, what happens to a person when they die? Fourth, why is it possible for us to know anything at all? Fifth, how do we know the difference between right and wrong? How is it possible to have an objective moral truth? Number six, what is the purpose in life? 7, why does anything at all exist? The third element of a good worldview, it will make you a better person. Naturalism, scientific materialism, which is where the subset atheism falls in. Let's describe that. This is the belief that the only reliable or valid instrument to deciding the truth or even the value of a proposition is the scientific method. There is no supernatural, no God, no truth except that found in science. Life is explained in purely mechanical terms, and phenomena such as mind and consciousness are considered nothing but epiphenomena, or curious byproducts. Charles Darwin, who was a naturalist and atheist, Charles Darwin is responsible for the theory of evolution by natural selection. More specifically, that man evolved from the great apes. Chance is the creator in Charles Darwin's world. That said, Charles Darwin had a very profound doubt right near the end of his life about his theory. In a letter to his friend William Graham on July 3rd, 1881, Charles Darwin wrote this: "Nevertheless, you have expressed my inward conviction, though far more vividly and clearly than I could have done, that the universe is not the result of chance." He goes on to say this: "But then with me, the horrid doubt always arises as to whether the convictions of a man's mind, which has been developed from the mind of the lower animals, are of any value or at all trustworthy. Would anyone trust in the convictions of a monkey's mind if there are any convictions in such a mind?" Unquote. Charles Darwin's lack of empirical evidence, or the lack of empirical evidence, may not be as devastating as the deeper doubt he expressed to his friend Graham 9 months before his death. What a sad note it is that as Charles Darwin's life came to an end, he came to realize that his own theory negated itself. The epistemological nihilism inherent in Darwin's theory ultimately becomes the refutation of every Darwinist. If we are the chance products of undirected processes, and if we come from ape-like ancestors, what possible convictions could any of us have regarding our own thoughts, our own certainties, if in fact they're just the thoughts of a monkey? In my opinion, it is intellectual suicide to claim materialism or atheism as your worldview. Because what you're saying is, I should not rely on my own thoughts because they're just the thoughts of an ape. You see, God has created mankind. He's created the animals, but he has created man separately. We're different. We're not like the animals. We contemplate our existence. We have thoughts. We create art. We make music. We contemplate our existence. We contemplate God. It's an absurd notion to think that we came from the apes. In fact, there is no proof for that anywhere in reality. It's called the missing link for a reason. It's a theory.
Okay, a lot of people get really upset when you say that. It's called a theory, and I understand that because there is that does seem to that doesn't seem to give enough credit to science that is behind things like microevolution, that, in other words, that which can be readily shown through just adaptation. Fur becomes thicker in some areas where it's colder, microevolution. But what cannot really be argued for, in my opinion, successfully, is that we all came from one ancestor. It doesn't work. Now, let me, here on the Armor of Truth Book Club, once again, now we talk a lot about worldview here. We've talked about the worldview of the ancient Near Easterns. We've talked about worldview in that last little video I showed you, the worldview that Charles Darwin held, which had materialism and atheism as a part of it. If you're interested in exploring worldviews, understanding what worldview is and how all people have a worldview. They might not realize they have one, but it's very good to understand that you do have a worldview and to test your worldview. This is why I say all the time the Christian worldview is the one that can be defended in a public forum against all objections with reason, logic, and evidence, and defended successfully. Here's a book for you to check out, The Universe Next Door, by James Sire. It's not a new book. There's a new versions of it out, but this is a book that's been used as a textbook as well. It's a basic worldview catalog, and it will help you understand many things about the way people view the world and why they view it that way. Help you understand things like the genetic fallacy, where people claim you're only a Christian because you were born in the United States. If you'd been born in Saudi Arabia, you'd be a Muslim. That does not make any argument against Christianity being true. How do you explain atheists in Saudi Arabia? How do you explain atheists in the United States? This book deals with deism, it deals with naturalism, it deals with nihilism, existentialism, Eastern pantheistic monism, deals with the New Age, which is spirituality without religion, and deals with postmodernism, which you talk about here an awful lot. It deals with Islamic theism. So this is, once again, James W. Sire. This book's in its 5th edition. I think it might be in its 6th edition now. I'm not sure. I think probably just 5th. But there it is, The Universe Next Door. A little light reading. This really isn't a book that you sit down and read cover to cover. This is really a good reference book for, like, let's just say I'm curious about the worldview of, like we've talked about here, naturalism, Charles Darwin. What does that mean? So here you go to chapter 4. And the silence of finite space, or naturalism. So we get up. Without warning, David was visited by an exact vision of death, a long hole in the ground no wider than your body, down which you were drawn while the white faces recede. You try to reach them, but your arms are pinned. Shovels pour dirt in your face. There you will be forever, in an upright position, blind and silent. And in time, no one will remember you, and you will never be called. As strata of rock shift, your fingers elongate, and your teeth are distended sideways in a great underground grimace, indistinguishable from a strip of chalk. And the earth tumbles on, and the sun expires, and unaltering darkness reigns where once there were stars. This is from John Updike, poem called Pigeon Feathers. And this is a very good explanation of the mindset of the naturalist. There's nothing beyond matter. That's materialism, yes, but naturalism is in the same boat. For instance, for example, here it says, deism is the isthmus between two great continents, or the gap. Deism and naturalism. To get from the first to the second, deism is the natural route. So you'll actually even hear many atheists today saying, I'm probably more of a deist. Funny thing for an atheist to say. I think that is Schuyler Fiction has made that argument before. He's claimed that he's probably a deist, but remains one of YouTube's loudest atheist voices. I guess it doesn't pay quite as much to be a deist as it does to be a loud atheist. Perhaps without deism, naturalism would not have come about so readily. Deism, in its warm 18th century versions, has become almost an intellectual curiosity, handy for an explanation of the foundation of American democracy, but not much held today. Other than Christian theists, there are few today who explain our situation and indication of God's providence. Deism's sophisticated 20th century versions are mostly cold and limited to a few scientists and intellectuals, and to those who, while they say they believe in God, have only a vague notion of what he might be. Naturalism, on the other hand, was and is serious business. In intellectual terms, the root is this. In theism, God is the infinite personal creator and sustainer of the cosmos. By cosmos, we mean all that is created. In deism, God is reduced. He begins to lose his personality. Remember, deism, at a very short definition, would say this. God created everything, and then he just went away. He's not particularly interested in it. So he begins to lose his personality, though he remains creator, and by implication, the sustainer of the cosmos. In naturalism, God is further reduced. He loses his very existence. Swing figures in this shift come from theism to naturalism. Swing figures in this, coming from theism to naturalism, are legion, especially between 1600 and 1750. So during the Enlightenment. René Descartes, a Christian theist by conscious confession, set the stage by conceiving of the universe as a giant mechanism of matter, which people comprehended by mind. He thus split reality into two kinds of being, ever since the Western world has found it hard to see itself as an integrated whole. The naturalists, taking one route to unification, made mind a subcategory of mechanistic matter. So I would say also the materialists probably see mind the same way. The mind is just a projection of the brain. That the mind doesn't exist. The thoughts, the consciousness doesn't exist without the brain. Once again, my friends, all these, you might not be a fan of quantum theory or this quantum mechanics, or quantum theory as such as it is today, but what it's actually doing is leading scientists who would otherwise have no time for God. It's leading them to conclusions that are very confusing for them because it's leading toward a divine mind. Not a divine mind that encapsulates the whole universe, but a divine mind that created it all, that brought it all into existence and is apart from it. That's the ontology of the God we find in Scripture. John Locke, a Christian theist for the most part, believed in a personal God who revealed himself to us. Locke thought, however, that our God-given reason is the judge, that our God-given reason, in fact, that it is our reason that is the judge of what can be taken as true from the revelation in the Bible. The naturalists removed the God-given from this concept and made reason the sole criterion for truth. Another happening, another result of the Enlightenment period was the so-called death of God, where reason was enshrined as a goddess, the goddess of reason, and worshipped as such. So, an omniscient, omnipotent God was traded in for one that is made of stone. One of the most interesting figures in this shift was Julian Offray de la Mettrie, 1709 to 1751. In his own day, La Mettrie was generally considered an atheist, but he himself says, quote, "Not that I call in question the existence of a supreme being. On the contrary, it seems to me that the greatest degree of probability is in favor of this belief," unquote. He also says, "It is a theoretic truth with little practical value." The reason he can conclude that God's existence is of little practical value is that the God who exists is only the maker of the universe, according to him, deism. He is not personally interested in it, nor being worshipped by anyone in it. So God's existence can be effectively discounted as a being of no importance. Alfred North Whitehead, for example, said, "Of course we find in the 18th century Paley's famous argument that mechanism presupposes a God who is the author of nature. But even before Paley put the argument into its final form, David Hume had written the retort that the God whom you will find will be the sort of God who makes that mechanism." In other words, that mechanism can, at most, presuppose a mechanic. And not merely a mechanic, but its very mechanic. So in basic... So this is precisely this feeling that this conclusion, which marks the transition to naturalism. La Mettrie was a theoretical deist, but a practical naturalist. And we find that today. I find that quite a bit, where we have a lot of theoretical atheists out there, but they're practically theists. Because they they steal from God constantly. When they appeal to reason and logic, they appeal to the power of the mind. That is stealing from God, the divine mind. La Mettrie was a theoretical deist, but a practical naturalist. It was easy for subsequent generations to make their theory consistent with La Mettrie's practice, so that naturalism was both believed and acted on. Behavior does indeed fuel intellectual development. In fact, if we take seriously the last phrase of the definition of worldview in chapter 1, which is on which we live and move and have our being, we could label La Mettrie a full-fledged naturalist. So, all right, so we get into more of that a little later on, but I wanted to share that book with you, The Universe Next Door by James Sire. It's a good one for understanding what all these today, because there's so many. Everyone, it's very cool and hip to have an alternative worldview today. Whether or not it's true, you realize we live in the relativistic age where there is no absolute truth. But of course there is absolute truth. So all those who live as though there is not one are obviously in error and will find nothing. Damon Zodiac says here that flat earth gives us a finite reality we can relate to, even if it is spirit masquerading as matter. Globe earth can't explain the infinite space we're apparently expanding into. I don't know. I'll push back on that. I'll say that, I don't think it matters either way. For what you're saying there, he says here that flat earth gives us a finite reality we can relate to. I think the standard cosmological model, if you just use the Big Bang, I'm not saying that that's necessarily what I think happened, but it is the most common cosmological model today. And if I'm going to impress people around the world that Christianity is true, just like the Apostle Paul in Acts 17, I'm going to have to use language that they understand. And so there's nothing about the creation account that makes the Big Bang Theory impossible. In fact, the Big Bang Theory seems to play right into it. Everything created at once, out of nothing. So I think that what I'm saying here is that Damon Zodiac says our flat earth gives us a finite reality that we can relate to. I think the model that the most common cosmological model of the day gives us a finite reality we can relate to too. Why do I say that? Because the universe cannot be infinite. It absolutely is illogical. It makes no reasonable sense that the universe is infinite. Because it is made of time, space, and matter, which we can see all around us. Entropy. Entropy is the way of our universe. Things are winding down. Things are cooling off. Things are spreading out, as Damon Zodiac says here. Even if it's spirit masquerading as matter, globe earth can't explain the infinite space we are apparently expanding into. But see, that's the problem. We're not expanding into infinite space. Space is expanding into nothing. See, so I think that's what Damon here is saying, is that it gives us something that we can anchor ourselves onto. And perhaps that's why flat earth theory is prominent today, that it does give people something to relate to. But I don't think it's necessary. I think that whether or not you appeal to the Big Bang Theory or not, or whether you just appeal to biblical creation, we see a universe, or we see a world around us where things tend from order toward chaos. You know, leave your house for a little while. Leave your house for a week and come back and things are, or clean your house up. You know, in 2 or 3 days, it's going to tend toward disorder. You know, leave your yard alone for a while. It's going to tend toward disorder. An old cabin out in the middle of the woods that's been left there for years, tending toward disorder. We see the same thing with whatever we can trust and believe about the study of heavenly bodies out there around us. We see the same thing. We understand things to be, in the most common cosmological model anyway, things to be cooling off. So that gives us, that helps our argument out. So I don't think it makes any difference. I think that the standard model gives us a finite reality that we can relate to just fine, because it shows us that there was a beginning. The cosmological argument, the most basic Kalam cosmological argument, anything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. That's finite. That is finite. That is not infinite. So that is, and those premises, those first two premises can be defended, can be supported very easily. There's Rosie Clower saying that I have no position on the shape of the earth. Interesting conversation, though. I think so too. It does edify us. As controversial as some can make it, I'm never going to make it controversial. I'm going to be happy to listen to anyone who's got an opinion about it one way or the other. I see no reason for us to be divided over it. Robert Shortman says the shape doesn't matter. The only thing that does is the painting and believing. That might be a typo. But yeah, I understand what you're saying there. Repenting, not painting. The repenting and believing. Gotcha. Yeah, that's true. That is what's most important. The pure gospel, the straight gospel. In fact, what is most important about anything right now, especially when we go about our daily life as Christians, as followers of Jesus Christ, Christians in the purest sense of the word, the gospel. Number one. It's the first step in the gospel. You have to show people what their true condition is. You show people what their true condition is by showing them God's law. And when people see that they that they haven't lived up to God's law, because people think they're good, don't they? People think that they're good people. You ask 9 out of 10 people will say, yeah. Probably most times 10 out of 10 people will say, yeah, I'm a good person. I think I'm a good person. So you show them their condition, and you explain to them what the solution to you being in this pathetic condition actually is. Introduce them to Jesus Christ and his ministry, his life, his death, and of course, most importantly, his resurrection, because without his resurrection, we have nothing. We are lost. We are floating around with no purpose. Christianity is not true if Jesus didn't rise from the dead. That's where the church began. Anyway, that is what's most important. So I'm with you, folks. That is. Dangbud says the same, Rosie. I don't honestly pay the subject much mind, to be honest. Yeah, I don't either. But it is, whether we pay it much mind or not, it is a big issue that's out there, and it has obviously it's been bigger in years past. I'm not doing anything new here today, but it's the type of issue that I need to cover here once in a while. KP Masonry says there is no measurable curvature, period. I don't know. I would disagree with that. The experiments that I've seen are fairly convincing that you can. Now, whether or not that curve continues on all the way, I don't know. But it seems, there are ways to show a curve. Whether that indicates what the actual shape of the earth is or not, I don't know. It's interesting. Damon Zodiac says, check out the weather balloon footage. I have. Listen, you're not going to find that I've not seen and contemplated every bit of evidence that's been shown out there. I've been on this issue for years. I understand what you're saying. The weather balloon footage, what about it? It looks flat, doesn't it? Okay, the weather balloon footage looks flat. Does that mean that the Earth is a flat plane? Do we discern as we look at something through a lens? Remember, what is this? They also make the argument about atmospheric lensing. So now we've got that pulls things over the horizon or whatnot. Now we're also talking about, where was it? The weather balloon footage, yeah. So we're looking at something from, 100,000 feet through a lens, apparently a convex lens, I assume. I don't know. What do you know about the lens that you saw that through? So as I understand what you're saying, yeah, I can see that when I look at that on my screen and I watch this weather balloon footage on my screen. Please remember, you're interpreting all of that through the hyperreal. You're interpreting all of that through a screen. From the actual reality where the map truly exists, and then that image travels through lenses and other apparatus, and then it finds its existence out here in the hyperreal. How do we actually judge the weather balloon footage? What should we actually take from that? Should we actually discern from weather balloon footage that we see on our screens that the earth is flat? I think it's a leap. But what's interesting is, once again here, that there are people in this chat today, which I appreciate you all being here. That's what I want. I want people from all sides of this here. And there are definitely people who are firmly on either side of it. So. MJA says here, she can agree that can see every day at 40 degrees south, Earth is curved from here. Yeah, my own perception, which, listen, I don't know. Should I trust my perception? Sometimes my perception is all wrong. I know, but my own perception, when I stand at the coast and I look 180 degrees left and right, it appears that there's a curve. Could I measure it? Well, I don't. I haven't run the experiments. It looks curved to me. Could just be my perception. I could be wrong. Could be. Critical Mass says he can't see the end of a hallway, but we expect to see a ship cross an ocean. The ship going over the horizon is one that seems to me to be, well, pretty weird. Pretty weird because you see the thing. Now, once again, now, without having done it myself, all I'm relying on is watching a ship go over a horizon out here in the hyper-real world, coming through screens. It's out there on the internet, coming through screens. Now, I'm not saying that you can't discern any truth through your screens. I'm just saying you have to take your discernment up a couple levels. What are you really looking at? Do you know what you're really looking at? Are you trusting what you're looking at? Should you? Nana P responding to Dank here says, I'm with you there. Some people will really get crazy about that because they think it defines the Bible in some way. Well, that's what I wanted to do today, was just to talk about the ancient Hebrew cosmology. What is it? What does it look like? There it is on the screen. And is that reality? Is that the reality in which we live? Or is that a symbolic depiction of reality as they understood it from their own context? And then, by extension, same thing with flat Earth today. Should we go so far as to accept one or the other? Now listen, at some point we should defer to whenever science has made something clear. But we should also be just as willing to change that point of view whenever evidence comes to light that contradicts whatever science has said is true. Otherwise, we have a religion called scientism. Robert Shortman says, all windows in planes are fisheye view. Well, what about when you're in a plane that doesn't have a window? Scott Parker says, God's people don't fall for satanic New Age conspiracies. They do. God's people do fall for satanic New Age conspiracies. They fall for it all the time. There's a Rosie Clower. Rosie says, let's see here. Thanks, Rosie, for that donation. Rosie says, God created Earth in his perfect design. All I know on this is is this interesting discussion. And at 10,000 feet, With my eyes, I see a curvature. All right, well, let's see. Was it Robert Shortman? So Robert Shortman says that those that airplane windows give you a fisheye view of the world. I don't know. Well, think of this. Critical mass says fisheye lenses show a strong curve. Let's imagine that the Earth is a ball, and you go up to a certain level. Let's imagine that you've got a wide-angle lens. Let's imagine your lens is convex. I don't know. Could not a lens that's intended to bring in as much as possible make a curve look flat? It's possible, right? You have to be willing to accept that it's possible that the weather balloon footage could show you something that looks flat when it's not. Badishan Joe, welcome, my friend. Good to see you out there. He says, if there will be a division between God's people and the world's people and its people, don't you think that division will be stronger towards the end? Maybe the flat or ball thing is part of that division. I think the division, will certainly be greater, stronger, to use your word, towards the end. Certainly, I think that's biblical. We can see that would happen. Because persecution is coming the way of the Christian. And he says maybe the flat earth or ball thing is part of that division. I don't think so. It's my opinion. Take it for what it's worth. I don't think that that's part of the division, although it very well could be. But any issue really could be used to divide us. This one ought not be one that divides us. If it does divide us, then we certainly have allowed the adversary to come in amongst us and divide us, because it's not an issue that needs us to be divided on it. And once again, Scott Parker says God's people don't fall for satanic New Age conspiracies. They do, man. They do. They do fall for them quite a bit. Just, go into a church today that's locked into this word of faith movement. But now the argument would be back to me on that one, says, well, those aren't God's people. And I hear what you're saying. So I understand that point too. But we're all susceptible to falling into those things. Once again, Damon Zodiac says proper evidence backs up flat earth. Badishan Joe says, people won't say they believe it's round, but will deny every flat theory. Well, that's not me. I don't deny every flat earth theory. Some of them have science behind them, and they look to make good sense. The question I always have is, are my senses lying to me? I always have to be aware that that's possible. As I look on a screen at a weather balloon video, where wow, look at that. Everything looks to be perfectly flat from horizon to, or actually not horizon to horizon, but from the edge of the screen to the edge of the screen, from the edge of the lens to the edge of the lens, it looks flat. Am I to assume that the earth is flat because of that? Is that a good, do I have good piece of data there? It is data, but is it visually reliable when you're thinking about curve versus flat? I don't think so. I don't think that those are necessarily conclusive. Yeah, MJA is talking about having a look at the horizon, standing on the coast, right on the edge of the water. Listen, two people, I might stand shoulder to shoulder with another person standing right there on the edge, right there in the surf, looking out over. We might even walk out into the water and get down as close as we can to being eye level with the water. And I might perceive a curve, and the one right beside me might perceive no curve. What does that actually tell us? Sometimes we do have to appeal to measurements. But as has been said here today, that there are those who will assert that there are no measurements to prove that it's curved. I would just disagree with that. I wouldn't want to fight about it, but I just disagree with it. Now, Jay's Ite is with us today. Glad to have you with us here, but I have to disagree with your comment here a little bit. It says that science has roots in the occult. Science isn't rooted in the occult. Science is just a tool. Science is a method for making observations and predictions. Man brings the occult into things. Man's heart, desperately wicked above all things, who can know it? It's man that brings the occult into things. Science is just a tool. That's kind of like saying that my hammer has its roots in the occult, or that my chainsaw has its roots in the occult. Science is just a tool for observing and measuring, making predictions, making observations and predictions. So, be careful with that one, because clearly what Jay's Ite is saying here is there's some truth there. He's trying to say, though, is when we think of, for instance, alchemy to chemistry. Chemistry most certainly does find its beginnings coming out of alchemy. But does that mean that chemistry is hermeticism? Does that mean that chemistry is occult and evil and that we should not do it or pay attention to it? You see what I mean? It's not a viable position. It's easily refuted. Critical Mass says, I do get defensive when attacked. Hey, you're not alone. It happens to everybody. But hey, if you believe in the gospel of Christ Jesus, you're a family to me. I love all you guys, even if you live on a ball. Right? Well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it's a ball or if it's an oblate spheroid or some kind of elliptical formulation. I don't know. We know it's not a ball anyway, right? It's not a ball. I mean, even if you take the standard model, it's not a ball. It's an oblate spheroid. It's fatter at the middle because it's spinning at 1,000 miles an hour, right? 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 Yeah, there's another one. I probably shouldn't have brought that up, but yeah, there's not a piece. There's a fine line here talking about science, because mysticism and the occult we're given much forbidden knowledge. It can be used for good or evil. Yeah, anything can be used for good or evil. You can use the symbol of the cross can be used for good or evil. I happen to think, it's just my opinion, I don't want anybody to think this is dogmatic or a Christian stance, but for me personally, when someone holds up a crucifix, a cross with dead Jesus hanging on it, I don't think that's a Christian symbol. I think that's a symbol that's celebrating the death of Jesus Christ. And I think we see it in some sects of religious sects that are questionable, to say the least. So anyway, the point there was, yeah, okay, so here's a cross, which in one sense is a symbol of our advocate Jesus Christ's life here and what he's done for us, the atonement, because that's where it happened, was on that cross. But then, in my opinion, when you put the dead Jesus hanging on there looking all emaciated and broken down, I see that as something different than probably what the people who have them are thinking about them. But so that's a good point that 9P is making there. Yeah, you can use them for good or evil. Discernment is key. Yeah, Dankbud drops the knowledge here. This is truth. Dankbud says science is just Latin for knowledge. Miss Ostrich bringing the questions here that make us think. Miss Ostrich says, is knowledge something we can gain only through experience, like know-how? If so, I won't know. I want to know what the earth looks like myself. I won't know what the earth looks like myself. Like through experience. Like if you were Felix Baumgartner, who went up and did that, the guy who went up in the plane and dressed in the spacesuit, I guess, and parachuted from what, 100,000 feet? Was it 100,000 feet? It's pretty high. Pretty high, up at the edge, up close to the edge. I don't know how far up he was, but he was way up there. I want to say 100,000. I don't know. Maybe that's impossible. But it seems like that's how far he was. You guys can find that on Google right quick. That'd be cool. But anyway, while he was up there, he had a perspective. Because, he was still looking through a lens, but he did have the perspective of what that lens looked like on the ground as opposed to what it looked like. And then, look at, there's someone who had a perspective. Maybe we should all find a way to get a hold of Felix Baumgartner and ask him, what did it look like to you just before you jumped out of your balloon? Like a crazy person. What did it look like to you? Well, that guy's crazy anyway. I don't know if we should trust him. It could be shaped like an ice cream cone. It could be. Parkway says it is not spinning. Interesting. I don't know. I hear the argument. The argument makes sense to me because I certainly don't feel like I'm moving. But I don't feel like I'm moving when I'm in an airplane either. After I've been in my car driving for several hours, I feel stationary. Now, I know inertia is acting on me, but once again, I'll tell you, that is one of those arguments that I find compelling. That's interesting to me. Why is it that we don't sense that motion? Now, I know there are good scientific explanations for that, but I'm just talking out of our general experience. Why is it not easy for us to explain without equations why it is that we don't feel that? Ken Kanicki's bringing it up to 1,000 miles an hour. Is what gets me. How do pilots not have a need to adjust for that? Yeah, it's interesting, right? It's an interesting question. I see. So I'm not. I'm not opposed to listening to the arguments. I like to consider them because I have my own observations to make. Thankbud says, the cross isn't Christian. I've got a video on my Patreon about the early history of the cross, what the cross symbolized, what it stood for, and it's very true. At the beginning, the cross was not a symbol that the followers of the way, those who follow in Jesus Christ, that is not a symbol that they wanted to be associated with to start with. That symbol became used later on. I don't have any problem with it. I've got a little cross pendant and the reason I wear that is because I want to be able to identify to others who are around me that, hey, look, our without having spoken. I want that to be seen. I want that symbol, what it is today. So once again, we think of context. The context of the people who were there at that time. Cross was not a symbol that they were particularly crazy about. They weren't very happy with it. They didn't. In that day, the cross was a sign of humiliation and defeat. But over time, and I'm okay with the fact that over time it became a symbol for what Jesus has done for us, because that's where he did it. That's where it all changed. That's where he said, "Tetelestai, it is finished." While he was there on the cross, that's where your sins were atoned for, right there. But I understand, Dank. I understand what you're saying there. I would probably push it a step further and say I think the crucifix is sort of anti-Christian, but not the cross. I don't think. It's true the fish was a symbol of the old church. I don't know about that one, Dank. Cross being a satanic image. I don't know about that. I mean, remember, it's just an image. It's just an image. It's neither satanic, it's neither good nor evil. It's just a symbol. And where the meaning comes from is man's heart. Whatever man's heart applies to it. Yeah, that's interesting. MJA is echoing my feeling on the crucifix. Yeah, no to the crucifix. Christ is risen. I think the crucifix is kind of a problem. Yeah, so that's what Nana P is saying there too. When the cross as a symbol as empty, he's not there anymore. You see, if there was a way, here's what I would say. If there was a way we could very easily symbolize an empty tomb, because that specifically points to Jesus rising from the dead. And that is where the faith comes from. Because Jesus rose from the dead, we are Christians. That's why. So if there was some way we could symbolically represent an empty tomb, that would be that's kind of hard to do, right? You might show a little symbol of the little cave and it's empty, but it's hard to do, right? So the next best thing to the empty tomb is to show an empty cross. He's not there anymore. But that's where the world changed. Martin Koch, interesting, Martin Koch says, I can make a bearing that is due east and travel in a straight line to get there. Agreed. I don't know what happened here, but I'm looking at Martin Koch. This is responding to someone, I guess, here. Says, Jesus fish has nothing to do with smoking drugs. Okay. All right. You'd run off stoned and scared. Yeah, I see. Once again, the folks that come here and watch these videos and hang out and participate in the chat, really, really good people. I'm really blessed to have you guys, just good people, just good-hearted Christians, and sometimes we have people that are not Christians in here. They're obviously welcome. We've had some Muslims come by from time to time, and because they like to hear the truth. They appreciate the truth. But anyway, Dank Bud getting along here with some of our new folks here in the chat. It's always a good vibe. Sometimes you get people coming in that are just looking for trouble, but we're on the internet. That's what happens on the internet. So I appreciate all that out there, Dank. All you guys, all you folks out there, just able to talk about this without flaming the chat and going crazy. I appreciate that. I think that's probably shows that we have the proper spirit working with us here. It's a good point there, Damon Zodiac. The cross is the cross between physical and spiritual on which we are all crucified. We all offer ourselves to God as a sacrifice. I would ask God in a prayer I offer my life to you, Father, as a sacrifice for you to use as you will, for you to glorify yourself through me. Not my will be done, but your will be done. Let me decrease as you increase, that kind of thing. So yeah, I'm with you there. Chuck Treba, the way this here says the earth is stable and unmovable. It certainly does look that way in the ancient Hebrew cosmology, doesn't it? But, maybe not even in the Hebrew cosmology, because as you can see there, the earth is actually sort of floating on the great deep. I don't know. Interesting, but appreciate that. Chuck Treba. I want to get that right. But thanks for being here. Appreciate you. There's a new name. Allison Welch, dropping facts. The cross is the Tav in Hebrew. Right on. Yeah, we've got good moderators here. I agree there, Damon. Which, as we come to the end of this one, it brings up another topic that just sort of makes me sad a little bit. But, there's one moderator that's been here the whole time. I mean, since nobody watched these videos, since back in the day when nobody was. I mean, very few people watch them today, I know. But even, year and a half ago, hardly anyone was watching the videos. One of my main moderators is always out there, very supportive. Grateful Temple doesn't appear to be hanging out with us anymore, and that makes me feel sad. And I think I know why. I don't have any problem telling you exactly. Just we're transparent here. I saw one day a couple weeks ago at the end of a stream, one of our other mods was just hiding people in the chat, and I just thought it was going too far. All of our regulars who were making good points. I don't know what I think it was coming from a good place. In other words, I think that one mod was doing that for coming from a good place in their heart. And so I just took the moderator privileges away from that person. I'm not talking about Temple. But ever since that moment, we haven't seen Temple around anymore. But listen, I am the ultimate moderator here. I have to make sure that the moderators are being reasonable, because, we are on the internet here. People will come in and say things that'll aggravate you. We can't just block everyone who wants to come in here who has a different perspective or wants to. Now, just to be clear, moderation is kind of how you've seen it happen here today. It's only necessary in extreme cases when people are just bringing in ideas from nowhere that have nothing to do with anything, or just, people sometimes show up to troll. And trolling, the better word for trolling, is just to distract people from what's going on. And that's all I really expect, just to keep things just like we've seen today. A reasonable, good chat. But yeah, I would agree there, Rosie and Allison and all you guys and Nana P. Good idea to pray for our brothers and sisters always. But yeah, I miss seeing both of those around here. But you know, is me removing a moderator privilege, is that a good enough reason to leave the channel and never come back again? I don't know. I'm not. Let's see here. Allison Welch is giving me a hard time. Allison says, "I hope you feel a bit bad. You did not leave a private discussion to be private with Pam Pants, a loyal supporter." Well, I didn't say her name. You did. But anyway, it's not that big of a deal. It's not that big of a deal. What we've had here is an overreaction to a moderator privilege. Honestly, there was an overreaction. Not on my part. I don't want people to be hidden in the chat, unless they're people that are absolutely flaming it and trying to disrupt and distract. And the people I saw being hidden that day were some of our just regular people who are always here. So it was, listen, right or wrong, there's the decision I made. I have to stand by it. And I do, and I care about both those people very much. But I happen to know Temple a lot better. So I miss seeing her here. That's all I'm trying to say, is I do miss seeing Temple. And if it's because Pam's no longer a moderator, I think that's an unfortunate reason. Just a lot of feelings and emotions, which is what we have to look out for. Can't let our feelings and emotions guide us. Truth has to be our guide. Allison, give me a hard time here. Are you talking to me? He says, "Sorry, you're very wrong in this. You showed you didn't care through hypocrisy." I was hypocritical. I'm willing to listen. I was hypocritical on this situation. Is that what you're saying? Yeah, that's a good point, Rosie. Being a moderator is not an exaltation to supreme power. It's just a way to help out the streamer a little bit. It's not a title. It's not an office that you hold. It's just a way to help the streamer out. Anyway, so just a little bit about that. I just wanted to share that because, it's on my mind. Mark Ryan wants us to discuss latitude. You're a little bit late, Mark Ryan. You might want to go back and watch the whole video. See, now this is where I get, okay, Mark Ryan says more than flurftards. I guess that means flat earth tards. Hate science facts. You see, that's where I get in trouble. When people if you're a flat earther, you call the other side globetards, insinuating that they're ignorant and stupid or something. That's what you mean by tard. We all know what you mean by tard. It's not esoteric. Come on, really? You're retarded because you don't see what I see. Seriously? That's how you navigate your reality. That's how you deal with other people, by calling them retarded because they don't see what you see. Who's got the problem? Who's the one with the big problem there? Same thing. Flat earthers call the other side globetards, the people who are convinced by the common model. Call the other people, well, I guess they're flat earth tards. I don't know, man. That stuff's useless. That's not very much. Not very useful at all. But all right. But nonetheless, I really appreciate all of you guys that are here, that have been here. We've had an interesting show today. I certainly wanted to keep this thing from becoming an argument for one side or the other because, as I said, that's not what I'm here to do. What we're here to do today was to look at the issue with God's word as the foundation. All right? And then, as God says in Isaiah 1:18, come and let us reason together. It's not about blind faith. We have to let the Bible be what the Bible is. That means we have to read it in context. So, reading it in context, as we found out early on here in the stream, there are several positions you can take from reading the creation account. And what I tried to do today was show the ones that are more sustainable, the ones that, I hate that word, sustainable. Sustainable, it's everywhere. Sustainable development. Agenda 20. The views, I tried to present the views that are more that are easy to support using Scripture and what we know about the world in which we live. So I hope it's been useful in that respect. I didn't come here to set a standard, to say that the earth is flat. I didn't come here to say that the earth is round. I gave my opinion very matter-of-factly about what I'm not convinced about, and where I think that it's not an issue that we need to be divided over at all. And I really appreciate everyone who's been here in the chat, even those who've been trolly. It's fine. It's okay. We got moderators that know how to deal with that. But I appreciate all of you being here and being able to talk about this in a way where it just doesn't devolve into people calling one another globetards or flat earth-tards, because it's useless. That's useless. And it's childish. It's just childish. We don't get anywhere doing that. Plus, there's also this to consider. Just when you think you've got it all figured out, you are deceived. Because you don't really know. You don't really know. You don't have it all figured out. You don't have enough knowledge to come up and say that someone else is retarded because they don't see what you see. When it comes to something like this, all right? Now, there are absolute truths. I don't want to sound like a relativist here. We do have absolute truths, and we stand upon them firmly. Christian worldview affirms that there are absolute truths, that the silly way to live is in relativism. So anyway, I hope this was useful to you guys. I appreciate you all being very kind to one another, and it's been interesting. It has. It's been an interesting conversation today. I always like to get involved with the chat, and that's where we spend a lot of time. So if you do share these videos around, make sure that you can tell people, listen, I know this video looks long. This thing is 3 hours long now. In about 50 seconds, this will be 3 hours worth of video. You could tell people, listen, hey, if you want the meat of the video, you watch the first hour and a half, if you got that much time. And then after that is usually me just talking to you guys. So you can, I don't know, if you can help out that way. What I do intend to do is to take some of these longer videos and cut clips out of them and put them up on the days when I'm not doing a video. Once again, our schedule around here, for anyone that's new, our schedule as it is right now, it might change in a couple weeks, especially when we get into the time change. I might do some changing, but as it's been now for the past 6 months or so, and is today, we have Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, Sunday, 4 p.m. or thereabouts. Around 4 p.m. But Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, Sunday. Tuesday and Saturday are Armor of Truth radio shows, where we do kind of like what we did today. Usually on this podcast type show that we're doing today, Armor of Truth Radio, we talk about current events, like, for example, like I've got some articles for later, like in the next Armor of Truth radio show, the unlikely style icon who's teaching older women to be fashion rebels, because that's important, right? Things like that. How do we think about that through a worldview that's founded on eternal truth? I've got another article that I'm going to share with you very soon here called, let me share this. Let me show you this. There you go. Check that out. Inside the Fall of the CDC. Now, this article isn't, I don't know. We'll see. I haven't read it all yet, but it's an interesting title. And what they're talking about here, how the world's greatest public health organization was brought to its knees by a virus. President in the capitulation of its own leaders, causing damage that could last much longer than the virus. Well, so this is the kind of article we like to look at on this show, the Armor of Truth radio show usually, and talk about what are they actually saying? What about what they're saying is not true, can't be true, is fallacious? Trying to think about the world we live in through the lens of a Christian worldview. That's what we try to do on the Armor of Truth radio show. And then on Thursday is the day that we do the. Here's one more article I've got in the hopper coming up. Why Trump must win the election. The only thing worse than Trump is Biden. I'm not talking about the breaking Hunter Biden scandal. I'm talking about the response to the. You see it there. People make fun of streamers when they don't say certain words. I've learned my lesson. My videos get deleted off the platform when I talk about certain things. It's just a fact. But anyway, so there you go. So once again here, as you can see, people, the assumptions we make, people would see this title and they say, oh, look at this. We're going to talk about politics again. We're going to talk about why Trump is the second coming. No, I don't think that. You watch the videos I've done on here. I've been super critical of the guy. His red flag laws are Orwellian. They're his idea. And Trump has bought into the big lie about, you know what, based on a computer projection, claiming that 2 million deaths would occur. And he keeps on citing that model that was a scare tactic. It was designed to convince national leaders to declare states of emergency and lock down their countries. There's a Neil Ferguson project. This projection was funded by, this guy right here. I don't know. Algorithm is tough today. Anyway, those are a couple of articles that we're going to be looking at on Saturday's show. But on Thursdays is the Bible study show. And you might be able to see behind me or you might not. Up there on my whiteboard, I've got big letters up there, new Bible study series. The last one we did, which was really sort of like an introduction to what makes us Christians. What do Christians believe? What is the faith? What is biblical Christianity? That's what that whole series was about. 6 months long, 26 episodes over 26 weeks or so. And it was such a good time. It was so fruitful and edifying, just for me to do them and provide them here, that I'm ready to start the next one. Possibly the day after tomorrow on Thursday at 4 p.m. Possibly we'll start the new one there, the new Bible study series that day. If I don't have the new one ready Thursday, I do have some good topics, individual topics that we can cover like on Thursday or until we get the new Bible study series go. But the next Bible study series, it's going to be, once again, it's going to be long. It's going to be one that goes on for months. And we do the Bible study one day per week, which will be Thursdays at 4 p.m. for now. I'll let you know if that changes. So, anyway, that's that's where we are, and that's what we got coming up. And, of course, on Sundays at 4 p.m. is where we do the low-tech version of the show, where I just sit in my chair with a few books and a topic, and I'll present the topic for a few minutes. And then it's just Q&A. It's just us interacting like this for 2-3 hours, however long you guys can hang in there. I'm willing to do it. So anyway, thank you all very much for your support. Your prayers are the most important thing. This ministry can grow on prayers alone. And I appreciate your support through PayPal, through the Streamlabs donation link. I appreciate that very much. It is required. I mean, it's necessary to keep all this going now that we've ventured out of the safety of the protection of the home, and now we're out in the wild. We got a ministry out here in the wild, and we need to survive. So now I have to do a better job of mentioning that from time to time. And but the material is always here, free for everyone. If you feel compelled to support it, then we appreciate it very much. And if you don't, or you can't, it's fine. You're welcome here just the same. It's how it works. God will provide. As long as we're in His will, He will provide what we need. He will provide for us. And that's where my faith is. And I hope that you guys will join me again next time as we discern our world through the Christian worldview to find out what is true, what is false. I think I will...
Operation Christmas Child is looking to Charlotte for seasonal help.
Once again with the ads, man. So I will leave you guys with the end of the video that I started with, this Mind of God video.
Chapter 4, verse 24. God is spirit.
God bless you, my
Those
friends.
who worship Him must worship Him in spirit and truth. Greg Hendricks, Ph.D., author of A New Unified Theory of Psychology, writing for Psychology Today, says this about mind and consciousness. In common parlance, the mind most often refers to the seat of human consciousness, the thinking, feeling I, that seems to be an agentic, causal force that is somehow related, but is also seemingly separable from the body. The computational theory of mind posits that the nervous system is an information processing system. It allows us, for the first time, to conceptually separate the mind from the brain body. How? Because we can now conceive of the mind as the flow of information through the nervous system, and this flow of information can be conceptually separated from the biophysical matter that makes up the nervous system. Now that mind could be conceptually separated from brain with relative ease, researchers have become fascinated with models of disembodied or artificial algorithmic processors that have little connection with the other elements of mental phenomena, such as conscious experience, culture, overt behavior, or the brain. Mind or consciousness, according to the lettered experts in the field, sounds very much like a metaphysical phenomena, rather than a clearly definable cause and effect relationship from a physical substance. This explanation of mind and consciousness is practically identical to the common theological description of God. Therefore, we are justified through inference to the best explanation to the assertion that God is a mind, and a mind is conscious, and a conscious mind is personal. Therefore, God is a person with a mind and intention. Finally, we come full circle back to the original assertion that the revelations we see coming from quantum theory seem to indicate that information underlies the matter in the universe. Quantum entanglement between particles that react to one another from small or inconceivably large distances indicates an underlying structure, a sort of matrix, by which all matter is connected, and from which this underlying information seems to be emerging. If the implications of quantum theory are implying that the universe is an emergent womb of information, and the only source for information is a mind, then we are justified in building valid premises and logically sound arguments for the existence of God as a person without a body, a spirit, who necessarily is eternal, perfectly free, omnipotent, omniscient, perfectly good, and the creator of all things. A divine mind.